Excellent. Okay, so this should be working now. So good morning from California. It's 6 o'clock here. So my name is Brandon Curtis. As you probably figured out, I'm Dr. Curtis's son. I graduated from Penn State in 2011 with degrees in chemical engineering and biochemistry. And today I just wanted to talk a little bit about personal finance, to sort of give you some things to think about. And so you might ask the entirely legitimate question on why you should ask a graduate student and why you should believe anything that a graduate student in chemical engineering has to say about personal finance. I'm actually in the process of studying for the Uniform Investment Advisor Law exam to become a registered investment advisor in the state of California. I've actually spent a couple, probably hundreds, if not thousands, of hours on learning about personal finance over the last 3 years. Yeah, but unfortunately, we don't have many requirements for personal finance education at the middle school and high school level. So a lot of people don't really learn about these things until they've already been working for a couple years. And so I'm going to talk about a couple different things today. I'll talk about credit and savings and debt and taxes, and basically how all of this factors into investing and how that's done practically and what the implications of it are. So hopefully, now obviously in 50 minutes I can't cover even like a fraction of this material at any depth, but hopefully it will inspire you to look into some of the details on your own and learn more about this stuff. And I'll give a bunch of different resources at the end that you can look into. And this presentation as well I'm going to record, and it will be available. So a little bit of just my historical context. I started at Penn State in chemical engineering and biochemistry, and I'm actually in graduate school now at UC Berkeley. At Penn State, I'm actually a State High grad. I grew up in State College. I worked on a lot of biotech-related things. I published an honors thesis on the production of membrane proteins and bacteria, and just sort of worked on a number of biotech-related projects. But now, out at Berkeley, I'm working on plasma physics, specifically on the application of plasmas for medical uses. So that just sort of goes to show you you can completely change what you work on really at any time. And if you do decide to go to grad school, you can work on anything. So at least for the moment, all this finance stuff is just sort of a fun hobby side project, but we'll see what happens in the future. So the first thing I want to talk about is just a little warning that you shouldn't necessarily trust everyone who has advice for you in the world of personal finance. So this important term is fiduciary. Fiducia is Latin for trust, and a fiduciary is a person or a business who has the obligation to basically act for the best interest of a client. And so you might think that pretty much everyone involved in the personal finance business is going to be acting as a fiduciary and is going to have a fiduciary duty to the client. It turns out, lesson one, this is not true. So broker-dealers are actually salesmen who work for brokerage firms, and they're actually paid by commissions and kickbacks by the companies whose investments and things that they sell. So they can make recommendations that aren't necessarily in your best interest, and that's totally legal. And a lot of people get screwed by this. But there are also registered investment advisors and certified financial planners, and they do actually act as fiduciaries, so they legally have to act in your best interest. And they're paid by one-time fees and what are called wrap fees. So a one-time fee, maybe you pay an advisor $50 to like go through your finances and answer your questions. A wrap fee is, so maybe you pay an advisor to manage all of your investments, and you pay like 0.1 or 0.2% of those assets per year. That's called a wrap fee. And anytime you really act with anyone who's going to be giving you financial advice, you should ask them if they're going to be acting as a fiduciary, and ask them really how they're paid. Because just like in many things, you sort of have to follow the money. If they're getting paid by the companies whose products they're recommending, then you probably shouldn't trust them. So I'm going to make the case that financial ignorance has always been a bad thing, but I'm going to make the case that due to a confluence of a bunch of different factors, learning about finance is sort of more important than ever. And so the first thing here is to look at what's going on with the Social Security system. So as you've probably heard in the news, so on the x-axis here is year from 2005 to 2040, and on the y-axis are the net inflows and outflows from Social Security and Medicare. So in 2007, Medicare's cash flow went negative, and Social Security is expected to go negative in 2017. And you might think, oh, well, there are many years of surpluses if you look back in time. But it actually turns out that the politicians already spent all of the surpluses. So all of this money isn't sitting somewhere where it can be dispersed in the future here when we need it. This entire deficit here, which is in the hundreds of billions, is going to have to be paid for with increases in taxes and reductions in benefits. So probably a pretty good bet that though Social Security is going to be around in some form, it might not be as nice as it has been in the past. And so what this means, coupled with the fact that we're living longer and longer, life expectancy is in the high 70s, it's getting up probably into the 80s now, is that the responsibility for financing this retirement, if you ever get the opportunity to retire, is going to be on you. And so many financial advisors use this 4% rule, which is this idea that the amount of money you'll need in retirement is equal to your annual expenses in retirement times about 25. So you can safely withdraw about 4% of your savings per year, which means that if you're going to be living on $30,000, that's still $750,000, and the numbers really just go up from there. So if you can't necessarily count on Social Security, then really this falls to you to figure out how to raise these big numbers throughout your working years. So congratulations on getting through the easy part of life. Now you gotta deal with this. So in the past, your grandparents may have had the fortune of working for a company that offered a pension, and a pension is a type of plan that's called a defined benefit plan. So this blue line here is pensions. This is from 1980 to 2006, I believe. And so, back in the 80s, there were 60% of people had these pensions available. Now, less than 10% do. And when a pension, you pay into the pension while you're working, and then the company guarantees that they'll pay you a certain amount of money in retirement. And this basically never happens anymore. These sorts of plans have been largely supplanted by plans like 401k plans, which are a type of defined contribution plan, which I'll talk about in a couple slides. And basically the gist of something like the 401k is you decide how much money to put in it, and you decide what it's invested in, and the amount of money that you get out of it is entirely dependent on how those investments do and how much money you put in. So again, like all the responsibility is now on you instead of on the employer. So this is a graph that I showed to some of my fellow grad students to try to convince them to start investing now. And so on the x-axis here is age, and the y-axis is dollars from 0 to 800,000. And so these different lines represent different situations. The blue line is a situation where you invest $5,000 per year for 5 years, and then you stop. And then you just see how much that has grown to at 5% per year by the time you hit 65. Whereas the red line is waiting for 5 years and then starting at 5K per year, and then the green line is doing 5K the entire time. And so as you can see, even though you don't actually put all that much money in the first case, you still end up with quite a lot because this has compounded continuously. And so that's really the power of compound interest. If you give it enough time to work, you can really accumulate a lot of money. And so the point here is it matters not just how much you put in, but like the earlier you can get started, the better. And so a lot of the people that I've worked with, they're starting to think about this in their 30s, and so they've already missed these good years where they're going to get the most compounding. So it's a good idea to learn about this stuff so you can start contributing as soon as you're able to. So, not to insult your intelligence, but you can use money to get stuff. You can use your money to buy experiences, but you can also use your money to get more freedom and flexibility, which is really what I want to talk about today. Oftentimes when I work with people, they ask me how much they should be saving, how much they should be investing. And so I just show them this graph. So on the x-axis here is the percentage of your income that you're saving, and on the y-axis is the number of years it will take to completely replace your expenses with your investment earnings, assuming these different rates of return, from 3 to 10%. So as I'll talk about in a future slide, if you look over the last 30, 40, 50 years, 5 to 7% is a pretty fair rate of return on the stock market. And so if you're saving, 10% of your income, which is what many people do and many companies recommend, it's going to take 35 to 50 years to totally replace your expenses. Though if you save a larger portion, it'll take a lot less, and you'll have a lot more financial freedom. And so another important thing to notice from this graph is that there are no absolute dollar amounts. It's all in terms of percentages. And so the real punchline here is that it's really these percentage rates that are more relevant than dollar amounts. Because even if you have a lot of money saved, if your expenses are very high, it's not going to last you that long. So basically, regardless of the amount of money you're making, it's important to save a good chunk of that. And so, especially with degrees in applied science and engineering, it becomes easier to save, 30%, 40%, and that can really give you a lot of breathing room in the future. So, sort of the first step towards saving money is just to